offended by Pussy Riot forgave them, but there was lots of nevertheless public demagoguery about how offensive to religious spirit that performance was, to which to my astonishment, I just found out today, American feminist establishment, personified to some degree by Camille Paglia, signed up to entirely speaking absurdities about how she empathizes with Russian believers that were offended by Pussy Riot. Excuse me, Camille. I mean, I don't know on what planet you exist. Yeah. Then what happened in the West? It also kind of flabbergasting, because there's no rhyme or reason except for the feminist punk community whom we expected to come to the Pussy Riot defense. I mean, there's Madonna, there is Sting, and then there are wild male philosophers like Bernard Levy and Slavoj Žižek, and then again Naomi Wolf and Camille Paglia are kind of absent. So I mean, it is very strange how Pussy Riot touch people on what levels and what. But very many, both in the West and in Russia, very many complained about Pussy Riot's lack of artistic value in their music. Well, if that was a good music, I would support them. But since this is this garbage homemade DIY punk, I cannot support it, and I cannot lend my honorable name to the cause. Insane.
But luckily, we Americans have a lot of experience with sloppy DIY punk and have a sort of a grassroots infrastructure now of people, who will kind of come around a cause like this. And Blue, I know you've done some activist work related to this as well, because, Mark, you were speaking about more of the mainstream feminist and mainstream intelligentsia, even in America, not really coalescing around this issue, but I think that there was, as Amy was speaking to, a huge, just a groundswell of feminist support for this issue and a lot from younger women too. So if you could maybe speak to that, Blue, and like how you see this sort of impacting a future generation of activists and feminists.
I think that this was quite interesting to find out about and learn more about, especially, and I think for the younger generation, or even, my generation, just noticing how this was like a moment of, women showing that they can be brave and stand up for whatever they believe in, no matter what the consequences are, even if it's to, go to prison or whatever. They still, got to have a voice and do something about it. And, I also volunteer for Girls Rock, and I think that's one of the things that we also teach within Girls Rock. And, this is a camp for girls from the age of 8 to 18, and, they learn a ton of things, but one of the main things that they learn is to be proud of who they are and that they have a voice and everyone deserves to hear it, no matter what. So I think even seeing this, it's also just another example as, despite what may come from what you're doing, if you believe in what you're doing and it means enough to you, then you can make people listen to you by any means necessary. You know what I mean? And in this particular instance, there was no violence that, no one was hurt or anything. It's just them saying, listen, we matter. This is what we want heard, and this is what we're going to do. And I think that within itself is, beyond powerful. It's like, this is what I'm going to do, and if this is the consequences, that's fine too. I'm not going to be hushed. I'm not going to be ignored, and, I matter. So I think that's great, That's my going.
And so much of, a huge factor obviously in this story is the role that the internet played. And, we've been talking all day about these shifting ideas of music in the digital age and new emerging platforms. And this is, a central component to this story. And I think it's really something that we can look to see the ways that the internet really can be used for social change in a way that people had not really seen before. We were discussing this earlier, but I've been really fascinated to read things about the role that memes played in this current election, and I read something that said this was the first meme election, which I think is so true. You saw the binders full of women and the big bird out of Mitt Romney's mouth, like all of that sort of, again, coalescing into this internet phenomenon. But in a way, I think Pussy Riot were a meme too. And I mean that in a good and a bad way, and that they were able to tap into this very visual, visceral image and transmit that. But, I think we also see now that the benefits that you get of being a meme is that a lot of people will pay attention for a very short amount of time. And then there is sort of a crest of that wave. So I want to, and this is open to anybody who wants to jump on this, but, what can we learn about the good and the bad of using social media and digital platforms to kind of get this sort of a message across? I saw you like opening your mouth, Amy, so I don't know if you, not to put you on the spot.
Okay. I mean, one thing that is interesting about Pussy Riot is that visually, I mean, they had a complete package with the music, the message, and the costumes that made them so shareable and like a musical level. Yeah, right? They were, for those who don't know, they wear full balaclavas, so you can't tell who they are. And they wear bright colored clothing. But the point is, like, their identities are pretty obscure. And it was a big deal when certain members were found and revealed. Anyway, I think, like, the mask element was very interesting because part of the point was that anyone could put on the mask and anyone could be Pussy Riot, and they were talking about that a lot in their messaging. You are all Pussy Riot, we are all Pussy Riot became something. And there's a little bit like the social media aspect of it where anybody could share Pussy Riot, and there were people putting on the mask and taking a photo and uploading it, the photo of themselves, and then all of a sudden there were pictures of Pussy Rioters all over the world and all over the internet. So I mean, that's a real meme situation. And it was interesting. I mean, that's a very like Occupy era kind of philosophy, like there's no leader, you can do this too, anybody's a part of the movement. That's a very social media kind of 21st century way of branding and messaging. And it was very effective. Like in terms of the organizing work that I did, there was an older woman who was interested in organizing around women's right to contraception this summer when there was a lot of really damaging rhetoric about women in the presidential election, and every other thing out of somebody's mouth was, what's legitimate rape or something about women don't deserve birth control. So, I mean, people were really mad, and so I met an older woman who was saying, why don't younger women wear Pussy Riot masks and start having Pussy Riots about the issues that matter to us in America, like birth control and our rights? Because I mean, I think this summer was a particular time when young women felt, Planned Parenthood is being cut and the rights we took for granted are taken away. There was a lot of anger, and Pussy Riot tapped into that sentiment, and because it was something that anyone could do conceivably, all you need to is cut some eye holes out of a hat and you've got a balaclava. It was very interesting. Of course, the downside of a meme, right, is that, I mean, once you hit mainstream media and you're on the front page of a lot of publications, then it becomes a trend and it's not really a social movement anymore. It's the hot button issue, and then after a while it's replaced by the next trend. So I mean, now most people are not talking about Pussy Riot, even though, I mean, Pussy Riot members are still in jail. So,
although we're talking about it.
We're talking about it now. That's true.
Which,
yeah.
Because I, if I could just
Yeah.
interject, I think it's the same media cycle that I don't think that the internet necessarily, makes those conversations more superficial or shallow or anything like that. I think it just speeds that cycle up. I think that any interest or any case like this and story like this, the interest crest, and it always has, and that's always the way that the media has worked. But it comes in these flashes now, and I think that that is the big difference. And it makes me wonder, and Molly might be able to speak to this particularly, but anyone who wants to jump in, is how do we kind of get beyond, like, how do we tap into that really visceral flash of, energy that, like you were saying, Amy, that I think a lot of young feminists felt over the summer. But now that, we're kind of in this post-election, I think, like, a lot of women are feeling pretty good about the way things went. How do we kind of tap into that and not fall into complacency? And what might this story tell us about how to do that? Oh, Molly, if you, not to put you on the spot now.
I'm not sure I have a nice, clean answer necessarily to the question. I mean, I think, because I think it's a big expectation to have for any one, situation to sort of invigorate or reinvigorate, one thing with a I guess, like I said, a clear expectation of it. But I think that it has generated enough conversation around the term feminism and the idea of young women in mass culture, again, calling themselves feminists, and the energy that they've been able to generate, I think, is something that, obviously there are many women in many parts of arts and creativity making music, and Blue mentioned the girl rock camps. I mean, those are some things that are tremendously exciting to someone who 25 years ago could only have dreamed of having something along those lines. I mean, it was actually unfathomable. So I think that this sort of energy and reintroduction into a wider conversation of feminist acceptance and energy associated with music is something that hopefully there's a way for that to resonate and continue on. I just don't know necessarily about what we should expect of it necessarily, because I think I've always believed personally that any action and any creativity and any sort of momentum is something positive. And 20 years after I started my band, that I'm still, for some reason, my opinion now is still requested on topics like this, is something that I wouldn't have imagined then either. But that's been my personal philosophy, is to keep making work, keep doing what you can, and remain connected, and then hopefully that will transcend and continue to inspire and generate more energy and momentum. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, it was a tall order. It was a vague,
somewhat relevantly,
sort of utopian request there. But we're actually going to move to questions now, because I want to make sure we have time for that. Any questions? Nobody wants to say the word pussy into the mic? I thought that was going to be like the galvanizing force here.
a lot of people have liked saying that, though. That you can certainly tell.
Yeah, I think we have a question up here.
I just wanted to know, like, what the whole purpose behind Pussy Riot and their movement?
Do you mean here in the U.S. or in Russia?
Yes.
Could
here
you
in the
repeat the
US.
question? I'm sorry.
I just want to know the whole movement behind Pussy Riot here in the U.S. and also in Russia.
So just